Before me, there was just this, a land of plenty.
Sargon's grandson, Naram-Sin, took a step no king had ever dared. He declared himself a god. No longer
Children of Akkad, today we carve our names into eternity. Victory will be ours.
my people saw this as the ultimate hubris. In our stories, we said the gods themselves became angry.
But empires are not easy things to hold.
In the end, one king rose above the rest. Lugal-Zaggesi forged an empire. But the world was changing, and beyond the horizon, a new power was stirring.
My next chapter began, not with a king, but with an outcast.
His army swept through my lands like a flood. My old ways of war were no match for his speed and strategy.
To manage all this, we needed leaders. Our first rulers were priest kings, men who spoke to the gods and guided our path. In a world of so many people, we needed a way to make our mark, to say, "This is mine." The cylinder sinks. My cities grew proud, so proud that they started to see each other not as kin, but as rivals.
Power was no longer just in the hands of priests. A new kind of leader emerged, the warrior king.
And with kings came war. We turned the very bronze that built our tools into weapons. Brother fought
Right. My legends speak of heroes like Gilgamesh.
The rivers were our lifeblood, but they were also wild and unpredictable. So we learned to manage them, to bring the
Place. And as our communities grew, so did our need for something to believe in. We started to build special
Sivinus. We saw divinity in the fertility of the earth and in the power of creation. Our gods were taking shape. This was just the beginning, of course. A few scattered villages, a new way of life. And then, everything accelerated. My small villages grew into something the world had never seen before.
We buried our kings with unimaginable splendor. So much so that thousands of years later, their treasures would leave the modern world breathless.
Our belief in the afterlife was absolute. We believed our kings and queens would need their core.
This single object tells my whole story. The two sides of my existence. We began to document our victories in stone, creating propaganda for all to see. Our art could be beautiful. Not all kings were conquerors. Some, like Uruk, were reformers. They fought not against other cities.
He united my lands by force, then pushed the borders further than anyone had dreamed.
Influence. He built a new capital, Akkad, the heart of his empire. It became the richest city on earth. My language, Sumerian, was pushed aside. Akkadian became the language of power, the tongue that held the empire. The art of this era was different. It was the art of kings, confident, powerful, real. Perhaps it wasn't the gods' curse. Perhaps the very climate was changing. A great drought fell upon.
And into this chaos came new invaders. The Gushians, mountain people. We saw them as
They swarmed over my lands and brought the mighty Akkad to its knees. The greatest city in
Paris. And just like that, the world's first empire was gone, reduced to dust and a bitter memory.
But I was not dead. My spirit, my language, my traditions.
After decades of darkness, a leader emerged. Utuhengal of Uruk reminded my cities that we were.
We rose up and drove the invaders from our home. We reclaimed our land.
The victory was won, but the work of rebuilding had just begun. And one man, a great general named
The age of foreign kings and barbarian hordes was over.
A new leader, Urnamu, took the throne.
And he started with my heart, the home of my moon god, Nana. He didn't just repair.
Truth. We built with newfound wisdom. A solid core of earth, protected by an outer shell of waterproofed base. And when it was finished, it was breathtaking. A mountain in the middle of my city, a symbol of my rebirth.
But a civilization needs more than strong bricks. It needs strong laws.
And these weren't laws of brutal revenge. For the first time, I decreed that justice should be about restitution, not retribution.
To manage my new golden age, I became a bureaucracy. I tracked every sheep, every bushel of grain.
I brought order to everything. I created standard weights and measures across the land, ensuring that trade was.
My next king, Shulgi, was a force of nature, a reformer, a general, and a master of propaganda.
But even at my height, new pressures were building on the borders. People known as the Amorites. In our fear, we did what builders do. We built a wall, a massive barrier.
My last Sumerian king was dragged from his throne and led away into captivity.
After my fall, the old rivalries returned. My land was again a patchwork of kingdoms.
And among these squabbling kingdoms was a city you might not have noticed at first. It was called Babylon. Its king, Hammurabi, was a new breed. He understood that power wasn't just won on the battlefield.
And when that moment came, he created a new empire. My old lands, Sumer
And to rule his empire, Hammurabi gave the world his most famous creation. But his laws were harsher than mine had been. Where I had sought compensation, he sought retribution.
My language faded from the streets, but it never left the classroom. It became a language of religion and literature, of culture and learning.
My stories became their classics. They took my tales of Gilgamesh and gave them new life, new meaning.
They even took my gods. They gave them new names and new roles in. My mathematics became the language of their science. My system of counting in 60s.
Centuries' mighty Assyrian king.
But time moves on. New empires came, with new languages and new, simple.
Who could read my words died.
I became a rumor, a half-remembered name in the books of other ancient peoples.
Then they came looking.
Men from a new world, digging in the sand for the heroes of the Bible.
They found my script, but couldn't read it. It was a puzzle that obsessed the brightest minds of the age.
And as they read the texts of Babylon, they found clues. Mentions of an older people, an older language.
They resurrected my language and, with it, my world. And they realized I had never truly been gone. Not all kings were conquerors. Some, like Uruk, were reformers. They fought not against other cities. But my ideas, they are immortal. I am the civilization that invented civilization. My greatness wasn't just in my ziggurats. It was here, in the quiet moments before. For most of my people, life followed the sun. You woke with it, you worked under it, and you
Breakfast wasn't a feast, it was fuel. Barley, the grain that powered everything, cooked.
And when they grew tired of our noise, they felt no guilt in wiping the slate clean. They sent a great flood to miss. But one god, Enki, had a soft spot for his creations. He broke the rules and whispered a warning.
Our world was filled with more than just gods. It was crawling with demons, ghosts, and angry spirits that could bring sickness and misfortune.
And after a life of hard work, nothing.
Because the afterlife was so bleak, memory was everything. We tended to the graves of our ancestors.
And these weren't laws of brutal revenge. For the first time, I decreed that justice should be about restitution, not retribution.
My greatest legacy wasn't made of stone or gold. It was an idea. The idea that a thought could...
But then we turned it on its side, and suddenly we could move mountains. My wheel allowed us to build bigger.
We were obsessed with numbers. We counted in 60s, a system that sounds strange today, but...
How do you measure an hour? We did it with a steady drip of water. We found a way. My land was a desert blessed by 2 rivers. The trick was getting the water from the river to the fields. We became masters.
It did not end with a bang. It ended that violence. My thrones were seized by new men, Amorite kings. They adopted my titles and lived in my palaces. My last kingdoms that still spoke my tongue did not unite. They tore each other apart over...
Then, the first people arrived. They were just passing through at first, following the herds. Straits. It all started with a single seed. A promise of a different way of life. A life where we didn't have to constantly build.
And so, we began to build. Little by little, we traded the open sky for...
We learned to work the land, to coax life from the soil.
We found beauty in the clay of the riverbanks. Our pottery wasn't just for storing food. It was a canvas. Innovation was in the air. We invented the potter's wheel, and suddenly we could make more, faster. It was all about efficiency.
And that simple spinning motion, it didn't just change pottery. It changed everything. Suddenly, we could move. Our gods became grander, and so did their homes. We built our temples to scrape the heavens. We didn't just build big, we built beautiful. Every detail was a tribute to our gods and a testament to our skill. With so much happening, we needed a way to remember, to record. This was our first attempt at writing it all down.
Our pictures became symbols. Our symbols became a script.
Our world was getting bigger. Trade routes stretched for hundreds of miles, bringing the riches of distant lands to our city gates.
Our stories became epics, tales of adventure, friendship, and the search for meaning. We grappled with the big...
Behind the walls, life for the elite became refined.
Knowledge became a profession. We built schools, the first in history, to train the next generation of business. We sought justice and order. We wrote down our laws and created courts to settle our disputes. A society. Our craftsmanship reached new heights. We mastered bronze, turning it into stronger tools for farming and sharp.
Even in times of war, we never stopped innovating. We created a plow that would sow the seeds for us. It meant more food, which meant more people.
Our gods were everything to us. We celebrated them with grand festivals, reminding ourselves that even with...
But life wasn't all war and work. We loved our beer. It was our national drink, a gift.
We wrote down our wisdom, our jokes, our advice. He who has much silver may be...
But she was more than a priestess. She was a poet. Enheduanna poured her heart into her hymns.
My people were farmers, first and foremost. Their tools weren't fancy, but in their hands, these simple objects could feed a city.
This was the foundation of everything. This man, in this field, working the rich soil between my two rivers.
And inside the home, the work never stopped. Weaving the clothes we wore, a craft passed down. Every loaf of bread, every bowl of porridge began like this.
Even in a world of hard work, there was always time for childhood. My little invention.
Not everyone was a farmer. Every village had its craftsman, the potter who turned the mud of the river into the vessels we ate and drank from every day.
The midday sun was a tyrant. We learned to respect it.
We didn't have money, not like you do. Life was a constant negotiation, a bit of cloth for something.
The great gods lived in their giant temples, but the little gods lived with us, in our homes.
The end of the day was for family, and to share a meal, and to share our national drink.
Because, before most could read, stories were carried on the wind from the lips of our elders.
And at the end of the day, we slept under the same stars that my astronomers would one day map. Before I tell you about my gods, you have to understand how we saw the world. My gods weren't distant or perfect. They were forces of nature. An, the distant father of the sky.
And then there was Inanna. Oh, Inanna! She was the goddess of love.
We believed our gods literally lived here with us, inside their statues. So we served them.
But how could we know the minds of these chaotic gods? We looked for messages, in the stars, in the shape of...
Our stories didn't say we were made in love. We were made for work.
My writing wasn't born from poetry. It was born from necessity. How many sheep? How much barley? It was the world's first spreadsheet. But we didn't just write down numbers. We wrote down our wisdom. Advice from a father to a son, captured in culturements, another of my simple, world-changing ideas. The wheel. At first, it let us make pottery faster and more...
We combined our ideas. A plow to cut the earth, and a funnel to plant the seeds, all in one machine.
We even learned to harness the wind. The sail meant we weren't just prisoners of the river's current.
So when you sign a contract, or check the time, or look up at the stars, you are seeing the echoes of my world.
And all the while, a new power was watching.
But my true enemy wasn't another king. It was my own success. The very irrigation that had fed
Since we had to adapt or starve. We planted new crops, but the land was wounded. The great...
Then came the final, deepest silence. My own language, the voice of...
My people did not die out. We just disappeared. We blended in.
Hammurabi conquered a people already defeated by salt, by war, and by time.
My voice was silenced, but my words were carved in stone and clay.
For nearly 2,000 years, this was me. A whisper, a forgotten name.
They found my writing everywhere, but it was a locked door. The key was found carved into a mountain.
The field known as Fertile Crescent's Edge, bordering the canal, shall be sold for 10 shekels of silver.
We found it! Look! It's magnificent. The inscription is clear, farmer. This land is mine. You have nothing.
Slowly, painfully, the brightest minds of a generation cracked the code. They learned. They found a ghost. They found a test in the machine.
That versed. I had no money, no coins. I paid my people in the necessities of life. Your skill and your
And what he found, it stunned the world. Not just ruins, but treasure.
Say Civilization. I've termed it. My relationship with my neighbors was a complex dance of war and peace, of trade and theft, of scorn and
violence. He found my art, my stories in stone and shell. This single object showed him my two faces.
And as he dug deeper, he found a layer of clean, water-laid silt, many feet thick. A layer with...
My memory came back in pieces. Tens of thousands of broken tablets.
And now, my own descendants are the guardians of my legacy. They use tools I could never have imagined.
So I was found, I was deciphered, I was resurrected.
A civilization is more than just a king. It's a million different people, each with a skill, each with a role.
He wasn't just a man of faith.
Meet the scribe. In a world where few could read, he was the keeper of all knowledge.
To prove their worth, they sought a quest. A journey to a mythical forest to slay a monster.
Meet the merchant. He was my adventurer, braving long and dangerous journeys to bring back the luxuries.
And we meet the farmer again, because all my other people...
Meet the weaver. Often a woman, she worked in workshops that were the first true factories in history. Her textiles were famous across the ancient world. Meet the potter. He gave us the vessels for our daily lives, but he also...
Meet the physician. While some relied on magic to fight disease, he relied on observation and knowledge.
Meet the brewer. Almost always a woman, she was one of the most respected members of the community. She wasn't just making a drink.
Meet the musician.
And finally, meet the person we rarely wrote about. The slave.
All these people, from the highest priest to the lowest slave, were the threads in my great tapestry.
I was not one place, but many. A constellation of cities, each with its own king, its own... We begin where I began, in Eridu.
Then came Uruk, the first true city in the world, a revolution in human life.
Uruk was a city of gods and innovation. It was here to manage the city's complex.
This was Ur. During my last golden age, Ur was more than a city. It was the heart of an empire. You could conquer every city in my land, but you were not truly the king until your rule was legitimate.
Not all was peace and piety. Cities like Lagash were proud and warlike. They fought viciously. My cities were the first great laboratories of human society. They were holy.
You think my world is ancient and gone. A story of dust and clay.
Every time your child learns to multiply, every time they count to 60,
Your epic stories of heroes who fight monsters, who challenge death, and
Your breweries, your craft beers, they are just the latest chapter in...
Your instinct to build great cities, to live together in complex societies, to reach for the sky with your architecture.
Your incredible agricultural technology that feeds billions? It is the child of my simple, brilliant invention.
When you read your horoscope, you are looking at the sky through my eyes. I was the first.
So no, I am not dead. I am the source code.
You may not know my name, but you live in my world. My story is over. But my greatest fear, the weight that pressed down on every single one of my people, was this. My world was not equal. It was a pyramid, built on a foundation of grain. At the very peak was the king. In later times, he was more than a man. He was a god on earth.
Below the king were the elite, his family, and the highest priests. They didn't work the land, they owned it.
My will is the law of this land. Build higher, faster.
Further down were those with valuable skills, the scribes who could write, the merchants who managed trade. The great, broad base of my pyramid was the farmer. He was a free man, but he was tied to the land. And at the very bottom were the slaves. They had no rights, no family, no freedom. They were the
And what of the women? A woman could be a queen, a priestess, a brewer, a landowner.
This entire structure, this delicate balance, depended on one thing: a good harvest.
They found my writing everywhere, but it was a locked door. The key was found carved into a mountain.
From that seed grew a city. From the city, an empire. From the empire, an idea. Was I a perfect civilization? No. I was built on slavery and conquest. So when you look at the world you have built, your triumphs and your troubles, remember the civilization that...
And we meet the farmer again, because all my other people...
But then, we had a revolutionary idea. What if we used our invention for more than just accounts? What if...
We wrote love songs to our gods, our hymns...
O city of my soul, thy destruction has been too great.
So the gods created a rival, Enkidu.
A wild!
But how do you tame a wild man? Not with force, with civilization, with...
Their battle shook the foundations of Uruk. But from this violence came the greatest friendship my literary...
To prove their worth, they sought a quest. A journey to a mythical forest to slay a monster.
But heroes cannot defy the gods. For their hubris, a price had to be paid. The story now changed. It was no longer about fame. It was, and in the end, he failed. He learned the hardest lesson, that the only immortality a mortal can achieve is
How did I organize the world's first states? I used the only model I knew, the family.
In theory, the entire city-state was the property of its patron god. The temple was his house, the fields were his...
The king was not the owner. He was the chief steward. His job was to manage...
I invented central planning. In my golden age, all resources flowed to the state. We collected everything and then redistributed it.
That versed. I had no money, no coins. I paid my people in the necessities of life. Your skill and your
serious. But over time, my system began to change. Wealth began to accumulate in private hands. Land...
And with private wealth came the great social poison, debt. A single bad harvest. My wisest kings knew this was unsustainable. Periodically, they would declare a clean slate. They canceled debts and freed the debt slaves. Regents. I did not live in a vacuum. I was surrounded by other peoples, other cultures. They were my rivals.
To my east lived the Elamites. They were my oldest and most bitter rivals.
From the west came the Amorites. We scorned their nomadic lifestyle, saying they dug up truffle. But not all my neighbors were enemies. The island of Dilmun was my gateway to the wider world.
And through Dilmun, we touched another world. We found evidence of a whole other civilization.
For all my talk of barbarians, the truth is my cities were filled with foreigners. They were my translators, my sailors, my mercenaries, my wives. I needed them.
Say ziggurats. I've told you. My relationship with my neighbors was a complex dance of war and peace, of trade and theft, of scorn and...
Death was a constant presence. We had rituals to face it.
But the journey was not to a better place. We buried our dead.
And what lay at the end? Not a paradise, not a hell, just...
And we continued to care for our dead. We offered them water to ease their thirst and food to ease their hunger. My kings, however, had grander plans. They believed they could take their households with them.
In the end, it was not the gold of my kings that conquered death. It was my words.
Every time your child learns to multiply, every time they count to 60.
You want to understand my cities? Understand this, the brick, made of river mud, water, and... The first thing you would notice about my cities was the wall. The wall was a statement. It said, the gate was the heart of public life. It was where news was shared, where justice was dispensed. At the center of the city rose the home of our god, the ziggurat. It was our stairway to verse and feasting. As my kings grew more powerful, they built their own households. The palace became a
Acids. My cities were veined with water. Canals were our main streets, carrying goods and people. Life was lived in the courtyard. The house looked inward, away from the noise of the street.
But the true genius of my cities was often hidden. The drains that kept disease at bay. The burial plots that kept our ancestors close.
I am not just a Kaweya.
My rivers were wild and unpredictable, so I tamed them. I dug canals to steer the water where I wanted it to go. Flumiance. A great harvest was a blessing, but it was also a problem. How do you store it? I invented pottery to keep... My cities became too complex for one mind to hold. Memory was no longer...
When the sun went down, the world ended. So I found...
I understood that human muscle was not enough. I learned to multiply my strength. With the lever, one man... My spirit was one of constant tinkering. A restless dissatisfaction with the way things were. Everything I was, everything I built, grew from the earth beneath my feet. If you want to understand me... Clay was my marble and my steel.
Barley. Barley was my fuel. It was our daily bread, but it was also our money. From my great marshes came the reed, a miracle plant.
My land had a strange black ooze that seeped from the ground. Bitumen. It was a gift from...
Our wealth was not just in what we grew, but in what our animals wore. Wool was my great export.
Unfast. But for all its gifts, my land denied me two crucial things: strong timber and hard
lapis from the highest mountains of the east, carnelian from the riverbeds of the Indus, and gold from the hills of the north.
My language was an orphan. It was like no other language ever spoken on Earth. It was not Semitic like my neighbors.
To speak my language was to build with words. I started with a root word, like king. My grammar saw the world differently. You might say, the man built the house. I would say something more like, the house, it was built by the man. How can we know any of this? Because for centuries after I was gone, my language was still studied. Babylonian scribes learned it like you learn Latin.
To understand my end, you must return to my beginning. Picture a world shrouded in...
And then...
I was a civilization of firsts. The first city, the first writing.
My ideas were too powerful to be contained by my borders. They traveled...
The great civilizations that followed, Egypt, Greece, Rome, they all built upon my foundation.
But the fate of the first light is to be surpassed. I grew old. My land grew tired.
And then, my light went out entirely. My name was erased from memory.
You dug through the darkness, you found my broken pieces, and with your own light, you made my world. So what is my place in history? I am the foundation under your feet. The ancient
Imbratamis. I am the memory of the first time humanity dared to build a world together. Even the historians of the classical world, who came so soon after, had forgotten me. They wrote of
And then, you came. You came with your own stories, your own questions. You came with your shovels and your...
The great silence was broken by the sound of a spade. The forgetting was over. The remembering was about to begin. To you, economics and religion are separate worlds. To me, they were the same thing. The temple was the god's house, but it was also our central bank. The tithes and offerings are favorites. The temple was the largest employer. It commissioned the finest art, funded the grandest buildings, and paid...
This belief trickled down to every person. You gave the gods their portion first. A fisherman offered...
Because the economy was sacred, certain acts were not just crimes, they were sins.
But I have already given the gods' share.
The king demands his due, farmer.
This was the beginning of a new way of thinking. The birth of a secular economy. The idea that a king's treasury was different from a god's treasury.
I was born in a paradise. A fragile paradise created by two rivers.
I learned early that the paradise required maintenance. My canals were my arteries. If they clogged with silt, the entire system would die.
We learned to be precise. Water was life, and to waste it was unthinkable.
But I was connected to a larger world. When the forests in the northern mountains were cut down by others,
and then, my own success began to betray me. The water I brought to my fields contained waste. The problem appeared in my accounting tablets before it appeared in our bellies. The land was giving less and less.
We were not fools. We saw what was happening. We switched to hardier crops. We tried to let the land rest.
But it was not enough. In the end, the salt won. Centuries of... And so my people began to leave. The center of power shifted north, to lands that had not yet...
If you fly over my lands today, you can still see the ghosts of my canals.
My world was a web of rival cities. While my soldiers polished their spears, my other army was...
planets. Getting a message to another king was not easy. There were no international postal services.
And a letter from a king was a political event. It was read aloud in the royal court, its contents dissected.
But we also sought peace. I created the world's first international treaties, carved in stone.
The most powerful alliances were sealed not with clay, but with blood.
Allegiance. Diplomacy was also a game of competitive generosity. Kings exchanged lavish gifts. And beneath the formal diplomacy, there was a world of shadows. My kings relied on spies.
But when the words failed, when the treaties were broken, and when the insults were too great to bear,
And so my time came to an end. Not in a single fiery apocalypse, but in eclipses. New empires rose and fell, each one building on top of the last. My temples were cannibalized.
My writing, my greatest invention.
The desert, which I had fought back for so long, finally reclaimed me.
You brought my treasures back to your cities. My statues of winged bulls.
The Westerns. Aragout. The first breakthrough was a brilliant piece of guesswork, deduced that certain
It was not the work of one man, but a great intellectual race. An Englishman, a Frenchman, and an Irishman.
And what a puzzle it was!
The world was skeptical. To prove the decided time end.
The result was a miracle. The translations were in near-perfect agreement. The Vulcisis. But then came the final mystery. The Akkadian texts spoke of an even older people, the people of Sumer.
The first explorers of my lands used shovels, dynamite, and armies of men. The archaeology of today is
this. We can now know what my people ate and drank. Chemical analysis of the residue inside ancient pots can tell.
We can reconstruct the world in which I lived. By studying ancient ice cores and river sediments.
My bones can now tell their own stories. We can learn the hardships of the common person, the diseases they endure.
But to unearth my past is to expose it to new dangers. My mud brick walls, preserved for millennia.
Todger. But even here, technology offers hope. We can digitally preserve what is threatened. We can scan.
Then came the long, hot months of summer. A season of quiet waiting, of tending the canals. Then, the golden season, the harvest. This was the most critical time of the year. The entire community.
Winter was the season of rest.
Then came the sounds of the home. The grinding of stone on stone to...
As the sun rose higher, the city found its full voice. The marketplace was a symphony of chaos. Listen closely, and you could hear the sound of creation. The hammer of the smith, the clatter of the loom.
By order of the king, all citizens are to remain indoors after nightfall. Hear ye! Hear ye!
And from the heart of the city came the most sacred sounds. The holy...
As evening fell, the public sounds of the city faded, replaced by the private sound.
Until at last, the city fell silent once more.
I invented the city, and so I invented the reason for organized warfare. Not a raid, not a In my early days, every free man was a potential soldier. When the city was threatened, the farmers put down their things. My great military innovation was the phalanx, a dense block of heavy infantry, shield locked with shield.
I was the first to put wheels on the battlefield. My early war carts were not the swift chariots of later ages.
My smiths mastered the art of bronze. They forged helmets that could turn a blow, spears that... But the ultimate challenge was the city itself. My walls were so strong that taking a city by storm...
But the art of war never stands still. My rivals, the Akkadians, introduced a new style.
Victory was a brutal business. We documented our kills, we took the survivors as slaves, and we left our...
And when we returned victorious, we gave thanks to our gods. For in my world...
And so, we have reached the end of my story. It may seem distant, a world of strange gods and forgotten cities.
The tools change, but the impulse does not. The need to record, to communicate, to calculate, to tell us.
Your cities are larger, your walls are higher, your problems are more complex. But the essential challenges remain the same. How do we live together?
My story is not a lesson book with simple answers. It is a mirror. In my triumphs, you can see the blueprint.
I was the first chapter, the foundation. The rest of the book is yours to write.
Before my laws, there was only this, the argument of the fist. Justice belonged to the strong.
The first impulse for law was reform, to protect the weak from the strong, to ensure that... I did not create Sinai. My earliest law codes, the oldest in the world, were...
My courts were not run by lawyers. They were judged by a council of elders, the wise men of the community.
And what if it was one man's word against another's? We turned to the gods.
Since my laws governed all aspects of life. Marriage was not just a romantic union, it was a binding legal contract.
And my laws offered protections, even for women. A woman could own property, she could run a business.
But for the most serious crimes, when human judgment failed, we resorted to...
In the end, all my laws, whether sophisticated or brutal, stemmed from a single...
My story began with people clothed in simple animal skins.
My world was woven from two threads. Wool was the fabric of the people.
For men, the basic garment was the skirt, a simple loincloth for the laborer, a longer, more elaborate lysis. Hair was a powerful statement. My kings and heroes wore magnificent beards, intricately curled and oiled.
We loved cosmetics. Both men and women outlined their eyes with black coal, a dramatic look that...
And we adored jewelry. We piled it on. Necklaces, bracelets, earrings, rings, headbands.
In a hot and dusty land, cleanliness was a virtue, and pleasant smells were a luxury.
My clothing and my cosmetics were more than just decoration. They were a language. They told the world who you were.
For all my great works, my civilization was built on one simple, fragile thing. Tintersis. Birth was a woman's battle, fought in the home. The midwife was our general, using...
As soon as the waters fell, the great work began. The plowing and the sowing. This was the season of... And to mark the new beginning, we held our greatest festival, the Akitu, the New Year. Sylogis. A healthy child was a blessing from the gods. We gave them names that bound them to our family and our faith.
The first years of life were a cocoon of maternal care. My children were breastfed for 2 or... Childhood was a brief, precious time for play. A time to learn the world not through...
But childhood did not last long. Soon, the real education began. A son learned the craft of his fossils. The family was a hierarchy, and the father was its king. He had immense authority over his children's lives, but families were formed by more than just blood. We had formal adoption contracts. A child could bring...
For most of my people, the family was everything. It was your school, your workplace, your safety net, and your...
When my civilization fell, my stories did not vanish. Your story of a paradise garden, a place of primal innocence at the beginning of time? My kings and gods lived in magnificence.
Your belief that the first man was sculpted from the dust of the earth? I believed the same. My...
Until at last the city fell silent once more.
My legal principles echoed through time. My laws demanding justice for the orphan, the widow, and demons. Even the style of your wisdom literature, the short, parallel lines of your proverbs, that was a style I perfected in my schools.
For centuries, you believed these stories were uniquely your own. Then, you dug in my sands, and you found...
I was not one world, but two, living in a delicate, often tense, balance. There was the city. Life in the countryside was a life of seasons. It was a world of hard work, of close family ties. The countryside fed the city. Every morning, a river of food flowed through the city gates. The city dweller often looked upon the farmer with contempt. His hands are raw, his clothes are always dirty, one of my scribes wrote.
And the farmer looked at the city with suspicion. It was the source of the tax collector and the recruiting sergeant.
But at times of great religious festivals, the two worlds came together. The people of the countryside would make
forts. My schools were not just for training clerks. They were my first universities, places where we moved beyond simple knowledge to union. My first act of scholarship was to make a list. We were obsessed with cataloging and categorizing.
Thinkers were brilliant mathematicians. They moved beyond simple arithmetic into the realms of algebra and geometry. They calculated square roots.
Astronomers. My priests were the first true astronomers. They watched the heavens with patient, obsessive eyes.
We were also philosophers of everyday life. Our books of proverbs were filled with shrewd...
I was the first civilization to believe that the past was worth remembering. My scribes created the kingly...
But my thinkers did not always accept the easy answers. In my poetry, you can find the first voices of doubt, of existential despair.
My greatest creation was not the ziggurat, but the library. The idea that knowledge itself could be collected...
I was not built on the land as I found it. I was built on a land that I re-engineered.
List. My canals were my greatest work of infrastructure. a massive, interconnected network that stretches.
I learned not just to redirect water, but to store it. We built reservoirs to capture the chaotic bounty.
Faults. To build my cities required an industrial supply chain. My brickworks were massive operations. To connect my empire, I built the first great road networks. They were arteries of communication. My cities that touched the rivers or the sea became great ports. We built harbors and quays to handle the ships that...
To live packed so closely together required another kind of engineering, sanitation. We built covered drains to carry away our waste.
But the weakness of a great infrastructure is that it demands constant maintenance.
When sickness struck, my people fought back on two fronts. We turned to the rational world of the physician.
The physician, the Azu, was a knower of water. He was a practical healer. He believed sickness was a natural phenomenon. Cures it. His cures were acts of powerful magic. He would create a substitute image of the demon and nation. To know the cure, the exorcist first had to know the cause. What sin was committed? Which god was angered? And sometimes, my healers combined their skills. We have found skulls that show successful brain cells.
For my people, there was no contradiction. You would drink the physician's bitter potion, and you would wear the exorcist's...
My cities were hungry, not just for food, but for metals, for stone, for wood, for luxury.
To the north, my merchants traveled overland by donkey caravan. A slow and perilous journey.
By the power vested in me, I command you, foul spirit, to depart.
The new lens of science allows us not just to see my world, but to understand it, to preserve it, and to share it.
My life was governed by cycles. The cycle of the moon in the sky, and the cycle of the grain in the field.
The year began with violence and chaos. The spring flood, the Kur, was a terrifying time.
And what did they seek? Metal. Silver, which became my standard of value, my proto-money. To the south, my merchants became sailors. They built sturdy ships to brave the waters of the Persian.
Their main destination was the island of Dilmun. My myths called it a paradise, a land without sorrow.
Here, we traded for the copper of the deep south. And here, we first encountered the products of another great civilization. This trade brought the world to my doorstep. My great port cities had foreign quarters, where merchants from distant lands lived and worked.
And all this wealth, this connection to a wider world, flowed upwards to the top of my pyramid. It gave my...
From here, from this great distance, all of human history.
And if you look closely at that story, if you trace its origins back to the very beginning, you will find that I was the first to choose the city over the wandering tribe, the first to believe that a thought could be held in clay. My solutions may seem primitive to you now. My mud bricks have been replaced by steel, my stylus by your keyboard.
I wrote my story on clay, hoping it would survive a few generations.
Before I had money, I had barley. It was my dollar, my yen, my euro. It was the great standard by which all things were measured.
I was the first to establish a minimum wage, paid in rations. But you cannot carry 1,000 bushels of barley across the mountains. For long-distance trade, I needed something more cent. My silver was not money in your sense. It was a commodity. Its value was determined by one thing only, its...
I lived in a hybrid economy. Large debts were calculated in silver, but they could be paid in anything of value.
This dual system created opportunities for the clever and the corrupt. Moneylenders could play the market, lending. My wisest rulers knew that this volatility could destroy society. They periodically issued royal edicts. And as private wealth grew, my people needed a way to store it. They created their own private treasury. The world as I found it was a chaotic flood of information. My first great intellectual project, this obsession with order led to my first great scholarly works, the lexical lists. They were vast catalogs of reality. This drive to categorize created a powerful way of thinking. My knowledge was organized in columns. To order the world, you must be able to measure it. I created the first standardized units of length, so I didn't exactly end. It was more like an acquisition by new management. The Amorites moved in, and things started to change. This new king, Hammurabi, was pretty smart. He saw all the laws I had written down and thought, I can work with this. He took my ideas, added his own spin, and created this famous law code. Honestly, even though nobody spoke my language on the streets anymore, it became a classic. Like Latin, you know? The cool kids, the scribes, all had to learn it.
They basically created a greatest hits collection of my work. All my stories, my poems, my scientific texts, they saved everything.
My story of Gilgamesh became a bestseller all over again. It turns out everyone loves a good story.
Our whole view of the universe, our myths, our rituals, it all got folded.
My star charts were still the gold standard. The Babylonians used my work to become incredible astronomers themselves.
And my little obsession with the number 60?
My ziggurats left a big impression. They inspired stories and buildings for thousands of years to come.
But my greatest legacy, the idea of writing itself. I showed the world that you could capture language, that you could speak forever. After a while, my cities got buried by sand and time. I took a long, long nap. For a few thousand years, I was just a myth.
Then, in the 1800s, some very curious people with shovels and funny hats showed up.
They found my tablets, but at first, they had no idea what they were looking at. My language was a complete mystery.
But slowly, piece by piece, they cracked the code. They learned how to read my diary. I was back.
My old home, the ziggurat of Uruk, is still standing today. You can go visit. Talk about a house with good bones.
So when you think about it, I never really left. My ideas are all around you. In your cities, your laws, your stories, your clocks.
It all started right here, with a single reed in a marsh. A reed to build a home.
Okay, so we've covered the huge stuff, the empires, the world firsts, the big ideas. But what was it actually like to be a person walking my streets every day?
Let's zoom all the way in. Forget the kings for a second. This is how we really lived.
First up, the menu. Our diet was built on barley, dates, and veggies like onions and lettuce. Simple, healthy, and grown right outside the city walls.
Bread was everything. We made these amazing, chewy flatbreads called ninda.
But let's be real, my most popular invention was beer. It was thick, nutritious, and we drank it through straws to avoid...
Gilgamesh refused to accept Enkidu's death. He would never again know peace.
The year began with violence and chaos. The spring flood, the Kur, was a terrifying time.
But his fame got him into trouble. He insulted the goddess Inanna, so she sent the bull of heaven down to destroy his city as
My dear Enki, your tales are as boundless as the heavens.
And your generosity, Inna, as sweet as the finest.
Our homes were awesome. Mud brick walls kept them cool, and the central courtyard was our private family hangout.
Family was the absolute center of our society. Your family name, your trade, your reputation, it was all tied together. Marriage was a huge deal, more like a contract between two families. But it came with a big party, so that was always fun.
Let's talk fashion. The iconic look for guys for a long time was this kilt made of wool. It was stylish and I guess very breathable.
Girls didn't usually go to public school, but they received an intense education at home in all the skills they'd need to run.
And we definitely had fun. We loved music, festivals, and board games. This one, the royal game of was kind of like our version of Monopoly.
If you had a problem with your neighbor, you didn't just fight. You took it to the elders at the city gate.
I was a society of laws, not just brawls.
When you got sick, you could see a doctor. They were surprisingly scientific, mixing up herbal remedies and even performing simple surgeries. But if you thought you were cursed, you'd see a different specialist. This guy would fight the demons for you. We believed in covering all our bases. It took all kinds of people to make me work. Farmers, builders, priests, potters, soldiers, everyone had a part to play in my great story. JG. Even our signatures were works of art. These little cylinder seals were unique to each person.
So yeah, the big picture is important. But the real magic? It was in the million little details of daily life.
So, you've seen how I lived. But what did I actually believe? Watching his friend die filled Gilgamesh with a new terror, the fear of his own death. His quest brought him to the only living immortal, a man named Utnapishtim, who told him an amazing story of Fulchus. Ultimately, Gilgamesh learned that eternal life wasn't for humans. He realized his real immortality. Our vision of the afterlife wasn't exactly a paradise. We saw it as a gloomy, dusty, So, what did it all mean? For me, life was a struggle. The gods were unpredictable, but the point wasn't to escape our fate. The meaning was found in building a good city, raising a good family. To order the world, you must be able to measure it. I created the first standardized units of length, of You've seen my cities, but how did I power them? It wasn't magic, it was engineering. And digging these canals was a massive project, the ancient equivalent of building a highway system. Everyone had to pitch in to make it happen. This was the goal, a complete irrigation network that gave us precise control. We could water our fields,
but it was a ton of upkeep. The rivers carried so much silt that our canals would constantly get clogged. Keeping them clear was a never-ending job.
My wisest rulers knew that this volatility could destroy society. They periodically issued royal edicts. My walls were legendary, not just for defense, but as a statement. They said, the humble mud brick was our building block for everything. Easy to make, surprisingly strong, and perfect for our hot, dry climate. Building my ziggurats was a real challenge. A solid mud brick mountain could trap moisture and collapse.
The secret ingredient.
Bitumen. My rivers and canals weren't just for farming. They were our highways. We built all kinds of boats to move everything from people to pottery. Our local taxis were these cool round boats called goofas. Totally waterproofed with bitumen, they were perfect for zipping around the canals. Then we discovered bronze. By mixing copper and tin, we created a metal that was way stronger than anything before.
My ziggurats left a big impression. They inspired stories and buildings for thousands of years to come.
If our walls were good, our siege engines were better. We invented the battering ram to bring other people's walls down.
So you see, I wasn't just a collection of buildings. I was a machine. A carefully engineered system.
But my biggest legacy isn't something you can dig up. It's not a pot or a wall. It's the ideas.
Taxes are never popular, but I invented them.
How do you trade fairly? You need standard weights and measures. I created official units for everything from grain to gold so everyone was on the same page. Before me, there was just the past. I invented history. My king lists were the very first attempt to organize the past into a timeline.
The hero's journey. The loyal sidekick. The wise mentor who gives a crucial warning.
That 360-degree circle you learned about in math class? That was my idea. It came from our love of the number 60 and our fascination with astronomy.
My buildings may have crumbled, my language may be silent, but my ideas are the invisible foundations of the world you're living in right now.
So when you look for me, don't just look in the sand. Look in your laws, your stories, your cities, and presence. But even the best engineered machine can break down. My greatest strength, irrigation, slowly became my undoing. The river water I used had salt in it. Every year, as the sun evaporated the water from the fields, my harvests started to fail. The land that had given me everything was becoming barren. My breadbasket was running empty. And when you're weak, others take notice. New people, the Amorites, began to arrive. They were looking for a... At the same time, my old rivals, the Elamites, saw their chance. I was caught between a migration and a...
My great capital, was hanging by a thread. The walls were strong, but inside my...
In the end, the walls couldn't save me. Ur, the jewel of my kingdom, was sacked and burned.
But the new rulers, the Amorites, didn't destroy everything. They were nomads who had just won a kingdom. They needed my expertise to run it.
My language faded from the streets. A new language, Akkadian, took over. I became a language of priests and scholars.
And this is the most amazing part. The Babylonians, my successors, launched a massive project to save ancients. They translated my stories, studied my science, adopted my gods, and copied my history. They buried me, but they also saved me. They created a time capsule, a message in a bottle, waiting for a future that could finally read it. I am the Sumerian Civilization. I am the echo in your laws, the ghost in your stories.
Once I figured out how to have enough food and keep the city running, a new desire emerged. I didn't just want to survive.
I carved these statues not as portraits of people, but as stand-ins. You could leave one in the temple, and it would...
For me, the eyes were everything. They were the windows to the soul. Making them huge showed the gods just how attentive and worshipful we were. And then there's this. We call it the Standard of Ur, but we're not actually sure what it was for. What we do know on one side is a story of war. You can see my four-wheeled chariots in action, my soldiers rounding up captives, and everyone being presented to the king. The other side shows what that victory brings. Peace and prosperity. A massive banquet where everyone... And what's a good party without music? We loved music. It was at our feasts, our temples, and our funerals. And we know exactly what our instruments looked like. We found them in our royal tombs. This is one of my lyres, over 4,500 years old. And because I wrote everything down, I even wrote down my music. This tablet contains the old artistry wasn't just on a grand scale. Even our personal signatures were miniature masterpieces, tiny, rolling artworks telling epic stories. My craftspeople were masters of combining materials. Look at this piece. It's gold, copper, stone. This vase is basically a diagram of my entire worldview. It shows how the natural world supports humanity.
So when you look at my art, you're not just seeing old objects. You're seeing my hopes and...
My cities were getting bigger, which was great, but it created a new problem. How do you make a deal with someone you've never met before? How can you trust them? I came up with a revolutionary solution. Don't trust the person, trust the clay. I invented the legally binding, written contract. These were incredibly detailed. They listed the exact terms of the agreement, the date, and, crucially,
And for the final signature, each person rolled their personal cylinder seal across the tablet.
Trading 5 goats for a boat gets complicated, so I started using silver as a standard medium of exchange. It wasn't coins yet, but it was the beginning of money. But what if you didn't have the silver or the grain right now? I created a system for that too, the loan. The temple often acted as the bank.
Of course, there was a fee for borrowing. When you paid back the loan, you had to include a little extra. I invented interest. Sorry about that. My merchants even created the first corporations. They would pool their capital to fund massive trading caravans, sharing the risk and the immense profits.
And this wasn't just for the boys. My laws allowed women to inherit property, run their own businesses, and act as equal parties in a contract.
A contract, a loan, interest, a corporation, a signature. These are the ideas that built my economy. And they're the same ideas that are running yours right now.
Having the most fertile land in the world came with a big downside. Everybody wanted it. In the early days, my army was just a militia.
But as my cities grew, I got more organized. I created the first professional, standing armies. These guys were full. And I figured out that soldiers are stronger together. We created the shield wall, a solid line of infantry that was incredible. For close quarters fighting, I had the sickle sword. It wasn't just for slashing. Its unique hook was perfect for grabbing and controlling an enemy's shield.
But my super weapon, the pride of my army, was the battle cart. It was the ancient world's first chariot.
Dance. These things were crewed by two people. A driver trying to control the wild asses, and a warrior who was basically a mobile missile launcher.
My wheels were solid and heavy.
And leading the charge was my king. He wasn't just a ruler in a palace, he was a commander-in-chief who led his troops from the front line.
We even made monuments to our victories. This is the Stele of the Vultures. The world's first war wasn't just about honor. It was about resources. A successful campaign meant new wealth for the city, captured from our rivals. My army was a shield. A brutal, necessary tool that allowed my culture, my art, and my ideas. Before I was a civilization, I was a place. A piece of land defined by two great rivers.
But my parents had a temper. Every spring, they would flood unpredictably. It was chaos.
But after the destruction came the gift. The flood left behind a fresh layer of nutrient-rich silt.
My other great natural resource was the reeds. They grew everywhere in the southern marshes, and I learned to use them for almost everything.
We built our first homes and boats with them. We wove them into baskets and mats. And most important, and then there was the mud, the clay, the dirt under my feet. For others, it was just earth. For me, it was potential. With this mud, I built my houses, my palaces, and my temples. I made the jars. The final piece of the puzzle was the sun. It was a brutal, relentless force. It's fierce, but I learned to use its power. The sun was my kiln. It baked my millions of mud bricks into stone.
And in this land of mud and sun, one tree thrived, the date palm. It gave me shade.
This land wasn't just mine. I shared it with wild boar, water buffalo, and even lions.
The rivers, the flood, the reeds, the clay, and the sun. These things.
My gods weren't distant figures in the sky. They were right here, living among us. And they were very high maintenance. Still as simple. The deal was simple. We, the humans, would feed, clothe, and praise the gods. In return, our temples weren't just places of worship. They were the gods' actual homes on earth. They had bedrooms,
and the priests were their personal servants,
their confidants, and their interpreters. They were the highly trained professors. But how did we know what the gods wanted? We looked for signs in everything, especially in the organs of sacrifice.
We turned it into a science. We created these detailed clay models of livers, textbooks for trainee priests to learn how to interpret the divine will.
Everything could be a message.
List. It wasn't all grand ceremony. Every family had their own personal god, a sort of guardian angel who you could hurt. My kings were also my high priests. Their most important job wasn't ruling people, but mediating with the city's patron.
And a few times a year, the whole city would party with the gods. During great festivals,
The most important ritual was the sacred marriage, by uniting the king and the priest. But if we failed in our duties, if the rituals were wrong or the offerings were insufficient, This idea that civilization is a contract between humanity and the divine, and that a ruler's first... My world was messy, unpredictable, and frankly, terrifying. So my scholars,
And my favorite tool for creating order was the list. I was obsessed with lists.
I made lists of everything. All the trees, all the animals, all the jobs, all the places. This wasn't just hoarding words. This was the beginning of science. To observe something, give it a name, classifications. My love of order was a natural fit for mathematics. I used it to design my temples, divide my fields.
I created multiplication tables, tables of reciprocals, and even solved complex algebraic equations.
This obsession with observation extended to medicine. My doctors, the Asu, would diagnose, and of course, they wrote it all down. They created medical texts that were essentially handbooks of symptoms and By mapping the heavens, I created the zodiac and laid the foundations for all future astronomy.
And I taught my children how to think. Advanced students learned through debate and by studying proverbs. They learned.
This drive to list, to calculate, to observe, and to record it is the foundation of all scholarship. I may not have had all the answers, but I was the first to believe that the universe had an order, and that with a sharp mind.
The highest religious office in my most important cities was often held by a woman. The priestess.
And one of these priestesses changed the world forever. Her name was Enheduanna.
But she was more than a priestess. She was a poet, a brilliant one, and she did something no one, man or woman, had ever done before.
She signed her name. By writing her poems and claiming them as her own, Enheduanna became the world's first known author.
My royal women wielded immense power, too. This isn't the tomb of a king's wife. This is the tomb of...
And this power trickled down. Many of my most important industries, like brewing and textiles, were often mentioned. Running a large Sumerian household was like running a company. Women were the managers of property, supplies...
Now, let's be real. It wasn't a perfect paradise of equality. Most marriages were arranged contracts between families.
But from the divine to the domestic, from the temple to the tavern, women were a visible and vital force in my world.
My biggest enemy wasn't another city. It was chaos. The future was a mystery.
So I looked to the heavens for an answer. The moon was the most reliable clock I could see.
The lunar calendar was great, but it had a bug. It was about 11 days shorter than the solar year.
After a few sessions, my solution was brilliantly simple. Every few years, I just added an extra month. This leap month put
And I didn't just organize the year. I organized the day. Using my base 60 math system, I divided the day and months. I didn't just think about the future. I organized the past. My king lists created a single, official history.
Soon I started to see patterns. An eclipse happened, and then a king died. A certain planet appeared, and then a plague began.
This led to a massive new project, omen lists. Thousands of tablets that said, if X happens in the sky. For me, time wasn't a straight line heading towards a better future. It was a circle, a cycle. By measuring the heavens, I learned to manage my world. I invented the future.
After the Akkadian Empire fell, I had one last, glorious comeback.
My kings during this time were brilliant. Shulgi, one of my greatest, reformed the laws, standardized. I became obsessed with paperwork. We have over 100,000 administrative tablets from this period alone. But it was too perfect to last. My final king, Ibisin, inherited a kingdom that was beginning to crack under the strain. The bureaucracy became bloated and corrupt. Provinces started declaring their independence. Famine was looming in the capital. In desperation, Ibisin sent one of his officials, Ishbi-Era, north with a fortune in silver to buy grain.
But Ishbi-Era saw his chance. He bought the grain, but then he betrayed his king.
Starving and weakened, was a ripe target. The Elamites stormed the city and burned it to...
And Ibisin, the last king of my people, was dragged away in chains.
The era of great Sumerian empires was over. The land was now ruled by Amorite dynasties.
So here we are, at the end of a 700-scene story. That's a long time for a civil...
Was it my inventions? The wheel, the city, the sail, the law? Of course, I laid the hardware for civilization since. Or was it my ideas? The notion that history can be written, that the universe can be understood. But it's also a story of failure. I poisoned my own land. My cities grew jealous.
But my true genius, perhaps, was that I knew I wouldn't last forever.
My bloodline ended, but my ideas became part of a shared cultural DNA.
So the next time you write your name, or look at a clock, or feel that human urge to bring order to chaos.
I slept for millennia, buried under the sand, forgotten by the world I helped create. And you learned that even a civilization made of mud and reeds, that looked to the heavens and...
I built my world on clay, but the ones who truly ruled it were the ones who could read it.
If your dad had some silver, he wouldn't send you to the fields. He'd send you here, to the Aduba.
Before you could even learn to write, you had to learn to be a good potter. Your tablet had to be perfectly smooth and flat. No sloppy work was allowed. Your only tool was a reed stylus. Learning to press it into the clay to make a perfect wedge, not too...
Then came memorization. And more memorization. There were hundreds of signs to
soar. It wasn't like learning an alphabet. The sign for star could also mean heaven, or even the word God. Advanced students learned by copying and debating literature, riddles, and proverbs. It taught them grammar, morality, and how to think like a true Sumerian.
And mistakes were not tolerated. My school texts are full of complaints about teachers using the cane. A scribe's hand should be as straight as a line, they'd say.
But if you survived the grueling years of training, the payoff was huge. You were a dubsar, a scribe.
I am the experiment that never ended.
My first literary works were arguments. We loved a good debate. Summer versus winter. The bird versus the fish.
Because the afterlife was so bleak, one thing became supremely important.
My greatest failure was one I didn't understand until it was too late. I slowly poisoned my own land.
You struggle with water rights. So did I. You face the challenge of a changing climate. So did I.
So when you hear these strange alien sounds, you are hearing the closest thing possible to a voice from the dawn of time.
Before you can hear my city, you must first hear.
The first sounds of the day were not human. They were the voices of the animals who lived alongside us. The rooster's crow was my first alarm clock.
In the end, my two worlds could not exist without each other. The city needed the farmer's food, and the farmer needed the city's protection and organization.
Running a large Sumerian household was like running a company. Women were the managers of property, supplies.
My political power ended in 1750 BCE. My voice went silent.
When one of your most powerful and beloved gods is a woman, it changes how you see the world.